Who will win the 2022 Senate elections? I'll tell you my prediction on the next segment. Hello everyone, welcome back to Luis Discusses Everything. And in today's video, we're going to look at my 2022 Senate election prediction early October. So this is my update to my 2022 Senate election prediction. And as you can see, I already have the map pulled up. I gave my most recent prediction was about 10 days ago. And so because we're approaching we are about less than 1 day less than 1 month away from the 2022 midterm elections, and I want to make these predictions on a weekly basis now since we're so close to the election. So I'm going to launch one of these videos every single week. The one I'm paying most attention to is the Senate election because I think the House is more of a foregone conclusion, and the Senate is much more competitive atmosphere. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do a prediction, but it will be less amount of predictions on that end than the Senate elections. That being said, let me show you my Senate prediction map so far. As I've said in previous videos, blue means Democrat, red means Republican. And the categorizations are as follows. Tilt is less than 1% victory. Lean is between 1 and 5%. Likely is between 5 and 15%. And safe is 15% or above. So the darker shades of color would be safe. The slightly less dark would be likely. The lean would be kind of like this shade, like a lighter shade, like in between here, the ones that you see here. And then the tilt is the lightest of the colors, which would be the less than 1%. That being said, let's start with the prediction. I'm going to start with the least competitive states and moving on to the more competitive ones. Start with the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, I'm going to show you the latest polls according to the 538 politics forecast. Now, I received some criticism in other videos about, why do you use the 538 politics forecast? They're so biased and whatnot. Yeah. Well, I disagree. 538 politics forecast, this is the reason why I chose it, is because they take an aggregate of all polls. They don't take just one in their predictions. As you can see here, you see polls from all sides of the political spectrum, from unbiased or political entities to more Republican funded and Democratic funded. So they take in all the polls and weigh it according to their bias, right? And they go from A all the way to F. A being the best, F being the worst. So you can see the better the rating, the higher quality of polls. In this case, in the case of the Florida race, you have Marco Rubio leading on average by 4.6% in the polls. That is a significantly closer race than August 5th, but it is not as close as it was during late August, right? It was as close as 2.7% of the vote. But now it's there's a difference of 4.6%. Now, it's easy to think that, because Florida has gone to Trump and then Republicans in recent elections, that Florida is automatically a Republican state. That is not true in my opinion. Florida is a swing state and it will continue to be a swing state. It just so happens that Marco Rubio is just insanely popular in the state. And I believe that he is very much on track to win his election by, I would say, a likely margin. Okay, moving on. Now that we have Florida, let's move on to the state of New Hampshire. Now, in the state of New Hampshire, a similar phenomenon is happening, but a wider margin. So ever since Republican senatorial candidate won his primary election, Mr. Bolduc, and Hassan has taken a considerable lead in the polls. That's because Mr. Bolduc is an election denier. and he believes that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, even though Biden did. And this is a state that voted for Biden for about 11 percentage points, and so it doesn't sit well with a lot of people there. Although in the most recent polls by even the Trafalgar Group, it gives Hassan a 3% advantage, and this is a Republican poll. Although it does give like the third-party candidate the third-party candidate is included, and so that might skew the result a bit towards one side or the other. But still, I think Hassan is very much on track to win re-election. I don't think she's going to win by 8 percentage points. I think it's going to be a similar margin than in Florida with a lean categorization. So there we go. Moving on, I'm going to move on to another less competitive state, which is, in my opinion, a less competitive state, which is the state of North Carolina. In the state of North Carolina, you have Ted Budd, the Republican senatorial candidate, running against Cherry Beasley. You have mentioned that in other states. Now, Ted Budd is only up by 0.7%. You might think that's very competitive, but in other elections, Republicans have won here consistently. I think in the last time this Senate race was up, the Democratic candidate was up in the polls considerably, and still the Republican won. I'm saying like about between 3 to 5 percentage points, and still the Republican won. So even though the polls give the illusion that this race is high up in the polls, I still think that there is a considerable undercounting of Republican votes in this election. I think that Ted Budd will win the North Carolina senatorial election, this time by a margin of around, I would say, a tilt margin in this case, because we got to take into consideration the polls, but I think he's on track to win re-election. Actually, I don't think he's going to win by a tilt margin. I think he's going to win by a likely margin, around 3%, I would say. Moving on, let's go to the next race that's a bit more competitive, but it also has the same mirage as North Carolina, and that is the Ohio Senate race. In the Ohio Senate race, you have Tim Ryan leading the polls by 1.6% against J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee. Now, the thing to consider here is, okay, in most recent polls, Tim Ryan is up by as much as 11%. Now, these are not rated pollsters, so we cannot corroborate the quality of the pollsters. But in two of very high quality pollsters, Siena College and Marist College, Tim Ryan is up by 3% in one, and J.D. Vance is up by 1% in one. So this is considerable. This makes you question whether or not the Republican will win. Now, all things considered, I still think J.D. Vance is going to win this Senate election, similar to the case in North Carolina, simply because Ohio has just shifted so much to the right. Like it has even shifted more to the right than a state like Florida. All right. So I think at the end of the day, J.D. Vance will win this Senate seat by a likely margin, just in the case of North Carolina. Okay. Now moving on to more competitive races. Competitive, not so competitive, but I think similar case to Ohio will be the race of Wisconsin. Now in Wisconsin, you have a tight race between Mandela Barnes and Ron Johnson. Now, Ron Johnson, as of, I would say, around September 14th, was up in the polls consistently. Mandela Barnes, that's what I mean, sorry. But then something happened. Like there was a huge amount of money being poured into the race on behalf of the Republican side. And the Republicans Ron Johnson, um, put all that money in ads across the state. Even I even have family members living in Wisconsin. They tell me like, "Whoa, Mandela Barnes was winning until that ad blitzed." And that was the case. This was a very close race. Um, I would say from September 19 all the way until September 26, and it appears so far that Ron Johnson is coming away with this. Not as much as you saw like in other areas, right? Ever since I would say August 15 onward until September 19, Mandela Barnes seemed to be on track to win this race, but now the race has shifted completely in favor of Ron Johnson. I still think Ron Johnson is going to take this race, but it's not going to be by a likely margin. I think this will be our first tilt characterization in favor of the Republican Party. So that leaves us with the 4 top most competitive races in this 2022 election cycle. Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania. Forgot to characterize Alaska. Alaska is a safe state, I would say, for the Republican Party. I think Lisa Murkowski is going to win that race. No doubt about it, in my opinion. But that leaves us with these 4 competitive races. And I'm going to start with the least competitive one in this area. But before I start, I want to mention how important this is that these 4 races are, right? At this point, Republicans have 49 seats in this prediction compared to Democrats' 47 seats. Republicans only need to win 2 of these seats to gain the Senate, whereas Democrats need to win 3. So it's a higher competitive advantage for the Republican Party. Now, that being said, I'm going to start categorizing each one of these races, give you my prediction, and then compare it to the 538 politics forecast. I'm going to start with the least competitive one, and that will be Arizona. The Arizona race, you have Mark Kelly, the astronaut, winning against Blake Masters. And the race has tightened a bit, right? But this race has remained in the hands of Mark Kelly ever since it started, from June 27 onward. It was a lot closer in the June term, but that also has to do with the fact that there were little amounts of polls. But as the amount of polls increased, particularly around the September date, around after Labor Day, where like polls shift to likely voters instead of registered voters, you saw a considerable and consistent support for Mark Kelly in the race in all the polls. And you can see even in top-rated pollsters like Fox News poll has Mark Kelly up by 6%. I do not think that Mark Kelly will win by 6%. I think he will probably win by a smaller margin. This is Arizona after all. Biden only won by a very small percentage chance. But I still think that Mark Kelly will grab this, not by a tilt margin, but I think by a likely margin. Okay? So this would be the, in addition to New Hampshire, the only likely state in favor of the Democratic Party. Let's move on to a different state now that we have Arizona characterized. Let's move on to the state of another less competitive state, in my opinion. That is the state of Pennsylvania. And the state of Pennsylvania, you have John Fetterman leading up in the polls by 6.6%, so rounding it up to 7%, against Mehmet Oz. The most recent polls, you have John Fetterman up by as much as 19%, as you can see there. I do not think that John Fetterman will win by that amount. That is ridiculous, especially in a state that is as competitive as this one. I think something like the Emerson College poll is more of a likely scenario, where you see John Fetterman winning by 2. I think that's the most likely scenario. It's just that I've seen a lot of independent news media talking about how this race is tightened, how it's a very competitive race. And I mean, it is in the sense that, yes, Pennsylvania is a swing state, and therefore it will be a competitive scenario, right? But John Fetterman, I think, has control over this race, has control over the narrative, has been successful in painting Mehmet Oz as a carpetbagger, where in other races that's not successful. And I think John Fetterman will win this race by, in this case, by a, I would say in this day and age, it would be by a likely margin. Moving on to the next two races left in our spectrum, it will be Nevada and Georgia, the two most competitive races in this environment, in this 2022 midterm election season. I think that Nevada, in this case, you have Adam Laxalt leading by 1.4% in the polls. We have to bear in mind that even though Adam Laxalt is leading by 1.4% in the polls, there is still this state is like historically notable for or infamous for undercounting Democrats, as opposed to other states where, like in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, where they undercount Republicans. That's why I put Pennsylvania as a closer margin. And so that being said, this race looks to me more like a toss-up than an actual than Adam Laxalt leading in the race. But if I were to pick who is going to be the candidate that's going to win this race, I would say that Catherine Cortez Masto will not win re-election in this race. I think Adam Laxalt has enough of a margin to win this state by, I would say, probably a tilt margin. Now, so far, you see that Republicans have, in my forecast, a 50-seat advantage over the Democrats having a 49-seat advantage. So in a repeat of the 2020 Senate elections, it all comes down to the great state of Georgia. And in Georgia, you have Raphael Warnock leading by 3.9% in the polls. And you have him in the most recent polls leading by wide margins. Even in Survey USA, a top-rated pollster, you have him leading by 12%. I do not think that Warnock will win by that amount. I do not think he's even going to win by a likely margin. But I think Warnock is on track for victory. And he is on track, I feel more confident in saying that he's on track for victory precisely because of the most recent scandals plaguing the Walker campaign, which will be the subject of a upcoming video, which I will post on this channel. Stay tuned for that. But given that, I will characterize the last Senate race in this Senate election prediction for 2022 midterm elections, and I will categorize Georgia as tilt for the Democratic Party. That leaves us with a 50-50 split in the Senate, which gives the Democratic Party the majority in these 2022 midterm election season. Now, in comparison, 538 gives the Democrat a 67% chance of capturing the Senate. I agree with that percentage. While the Republicans have a 33% chance of capturing the Senate. In a future video, I will talk about the House, but mainly focusing on the Senate in this case. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.